Hello and welcome. Today Dan is playing his Lord Windgrace Lands Matters deck. Nathan is playing Kaalia, Angel, Dragon and Demon Tribal. I'm playing Judith, Aristocrat Reanimator combo. And Joe is playing Nikya with big mana creatures. If you enjoy the video, please leave a like and consider subscribing. It makes a big difference, thank you. Now if you're ready, let's go! Dan plays a Forgotten Caves and passes. Nathan plays a Vivid Meadow and passes. I play a Swamp and I pass the turn. Joe plays a Sheltered Thicket, passes. Dan plays a Forest and then casts a Summer Bloom, putting a Forest, a Swamp and a Smouldering Marsh into play. He passes the turn. Nathan plays a Mountain and then casts a Giver of Runes and passes the turn. I play a Mountain and cast Thrill of Possibility, discarding a Mountain and drawing 2 cards. I pass the turn. Joe keeps a Carplusian Forest and casts Nature's Law, getting a Cinderglade into play tapped. He passes. Dan casts a Courser of Crucifix. He reveals and plays a Temple of the False Gods from the top of his library. Then, revealing a Stonecoil Serpent on top, he passes the turn. Nathan plays a Swamp. He casts a Burnished Heart and passes. I play a Swamp and a Rakdos Key Rune. I pass the turn. Joe plays a Mountain Valley. He casts a Prowling Serpapod and passes. Dan draws the Serpent and reveals Acidic Slime on top. He casts the Serpent for 7. He moves to combat and attacks me with the Courser of Crucifix. I take 2 damage and Dan passes. Nathan plays a Graven Cairns, then a Wayfarer's Bauble and passes. I play a Swamp and cast Reassembling Skeletons and my commander Judith the Scourge Diva. I pass the turn. Joe plays a Rogue's Passage. He cracks the Mountain Valley and pays 2 life to get a Stomping Grounds into play untapped. He casts Nikya and passes. Dan draws and reveals Nylea's Intervention on top. He casts Kodama of the East Tree and goes to combat. He attacks Joe with the 7/7 Stonecoil Serpent. Joe takes the damage. Dan passes, and in his end step, Nathan sacrifices the Burnished Heart and gets a Plains and a Swamp into play. Nathan plays a Solemn Simulacrum and gets another Swamp into the battlefield tapped. He passes the turn. I play a Swamp. I look to make a deal, asking for an unblocked attack in exchange for not blowing up their thing, and Nathan accepts. I cast a Dowsing Dagger and give the plant tokens to Nathan. I equip it to Judith and attack Nathan with her, which flips the Dowsing Dagger into the Lost Veil. I cast Shriekmaw and destroy Nikya, and pass the turn. Joe plays a Mountain and casts Ronus the Indomitable, and then a Vizier of the Menagerie. He checks the top of his library and passes. Dan draws and plays Terramorphic Expanse from the top of his library, and reveals Splendid Reclamation on top. He casts Nylea's Intervention for 5, and puts Paducah Bog, Command Tower, a Forest, a Mountain, and a Swamp into his hand. He moves to combat and attacks me with the Stonecoil Serpent. I take the 7 damage and Dan passes. In his end step, Nathan cracks his Bauble for a Mountain. Nathan plays a Mountain and casts Bolus's Citadel. Dan responds by cracking his Terramorphic Expanse to get a Forest into play tapped, triggering Kodama, and he puts a Command Tower into play and reveals Tunneling Geopede on top of his library. There is some flexing, with the others all looking at the top of their libraries. Nathan pays 4 and casts Ancient Cravings from the top of his library, losing another 3 life and drawing. There is some more top of library flexing, then Nathan casts Gisela, Blade of Goldnight for 8 more life and passes the turn. I cast Pitiless Plunderer with yet more of top of library flexing going on. I then cast an Avaricious Dragon and discard Ugin the Ineffable when I pass the turn. Joe casts Etali the Primal Storm and passes the turn. Dan draws and reveals Windgrace's Judgment on top. He casts Tunneling Geopede. He plays a mountain, dealing 1 damage to each opponent, gaining 1 life, and then doing it again with a forest, put into play by Kodama's trigger.
Then I will play Windgrace.
Lord Windgrace.
Indeed, sir. And I will plus Mr. Windy Pops.
Discarding a swamp and drawing 2 cards, he reveals Tectonic Reformation on top. He casts Retreat to Hagra and moves to combat. He attacks Joe with Stonecoil Serpent. Joe blocks with Ronus and takes 4, because Gisela's damage doubling is applied after damage is assigned. So 5 lethal damage must be assigned to Ronus before any other damage can trample through. So 2 damage is assigned to Joe, and then doubled to 4. Dan passes the turn. Nathan plays a mountain and cycles a secluded step to draw a card.
I'm going to look at the top card on my deck.
I'm also going to look at the top card of my deck.
Mine is Tectonic Reformation.
He casts Basandra, Battle Seraph. He then casts Diabolic Tutor and passes while he searches for a card. I draw my extra card from the dragon, cast a Fractured Power Stone, then Sir Conrad, and pass the turn, with nothing left in hand to discard. Joe casts a Skagan Hellkite and puts a counter on it with the Riot mechanic. Joe goes to combat and attacks Dan with Etali. Etali triggers and hits Tectonic Reformation, Swamp, Boros Charm, and off Joe's library is a card I can't make out, and the audio suggests it was a creature he couldn't play for some reason. He uses the Boros Charm and gives Etali double strike, and Dan blocks with Tunneling Geopede.
Are you done?
Yeah. I've just got to look at the top card of my deck again.
Yeah, me too, actually. Oh, that's not as nice.
Mine's Thunder Shaman now. Well, for the minute anyway.
He passes the turn. Dan draws, then reveals and plays Savage Lands from the top of his library, and reveals Scoop Mob on top of his library. He casts Rampaging Brontodon and puts Acidic Slime into play, with the Kodama trigger, and chooses to destroy Bolus's Citadel. He then remembers his Retreat to Hagra trigger, draining us for 1. He upticks Windgrace to 9, discarding Bajuka Bog and drawing 2 cards, and revealing Secura Tribe Elder on top. He casts the Sunder Shaman, and with the Kodama trigger, puts Scoop Mob into play. Dan passes the turn. To assert dominance, Nathan main phases and pays full price for an Embercleave, because Basandra prevents him casting it during combat. He equips it to Gisela, and concerned about me top decking my last combo piece, swings her at me and deals me 24 damage. Second main phase, he casts Anya, Merciless Angel. He passes the turn, and in his end step, I activate Sir Conrad, hitting 3 creatures, dealing 3 damage to Nathan, and 6 each to Dan and Joe. Dan reveals a Mountain Valley on top. I draw my extra card with the dragon, and cast Cling to Dust, exiling Bajuka Bog to draw a card. With this being my first time trying the dragon, I pass the turn and forget I must discard my hand. Joe casts Nikya and attacks Dan with Etali. Dan blocks with Acidic Slime. He then resolves the Etali trigger. He gets a Mountain Valley, Savage-born Hydra, Dreadhorde Butcher, and Spawn of Mayhem. He just takes the Spawn of Mayhem. Dan reveals a Jund Panorama on top, and Joe passes. At the beginning of Dan's turn, His scoop mob gets their counters. He draws and reveals Splendid Reclamation on top again. He upticks Windgrace, discarding Jund Panorama, and draws, revealing Harrow on top. He casts an Oran Reef Hydra, and then casts Roiling Regrowth, sacrificing a forest and getting a mountain and a forest into play, draining us for 2 and putting some counters on his Hydra. He reveals Spring Bloom Druid on top, and then realizing he didn't leave enough mana for the reclamation, moves to combat. I realise I should have discarded, and put in the bin Tybalt and Vona's Hunger, throwing a big old wrench into what was my plan. Nathan tries to convince Dan otherwise, but Dan swings the 1919 Brontodon, Kodama, Sunder Shaman, Scoop Mob, and the Corsair all at Nathan. Even though he has plenty of good blocks, he figures he is dead to Sir Conrad anyway. He declares no blocks and starts scooping, so that I can get the benefit of Gisela and Nathan's library. Before combat damage resolves, I activate Sir Conrad 4 times, hitting 9 creatures, doing 9 damage to Nathan, and 18 each to Joe and Dan, as Gisela would still be on the battlefield. Dan passes. I play Command Tower, and figure I can only do 16 damage to Dan, assuming he blocks Sir Conrad. I activate Conrad a further 5 times, but we only hit 1 creature between us. I scoop it up, and Dan wins the game.